Sam will be leading the panel session. Ready? Okay, thank you. Thank you all for participating in the first raffle. You want to put...
Thank you. Yeah, there are a few structured questions that I'll be asking my panelists that you've seen already this morning, and occasionally I'll allow feedback from the audience on some of your comments. So moving to Jack, what fields within reach in the next 1 to 2 years that could help public health team right away?
Okay, so first, we have to understand that this technology is advancing so rapidly. Like within 6 months, many things change, which is unprecedented. We haven't seen such rapid advancement with its effects on the research in the past. So next 1 to 2 years is a long window for this technology to say that what things can change. And we have seen that it's becoming more and more accurate. The accuracy is improving in all the tasks that we are doing so far. That's my first assumption, that we'll start seeing the numbers going higher, being it systematic reviews, being it econometric modeling, meta-analysis, all the tasks that we do in public health. There could be many new tasks that may emerge where we have more insights coming out of these models, which in the past was not possible, like in real world evidence, where we can combine imaging data with text and with other social media and other things very rapidly. That's going to be, I think, can be another power for public health to focus on.
Thank you. Mara, you want to add something?
Yes. I mean, I do agree that 1 to 2 years is a long time for this technology. Anything could happen. But if you ask me today, I have a hard time imagining that within 1 or 2 years, the large language model type of work that I'm doing is going to be good enough for what humans can do right now. It's understanding of nuance. I don't know that I would be able to incorporate ChatGPT as a research assistant in the same way that I have student research assistants. And so I may be wrong. I probably will be wrong. But I feel like maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, we're going to see a lot of testing of boundaries, see where it is good, where it isn't good, and a lot more publications in that respect. But in terms of how I use it in my day-to-day, I think that it's still not quite there.
Okay, Simon, yeah, go ahead.
Taking things a few steps away from LLMs, I think one extraordinary capability that is maybe a little bit under the hood because it lacks sex appeal, but it also lacks drama, is just the unbelievable capacity for signal detection that exists at a population level now. I was initially trained by working epidemiologists in 2016, 2017 in the New York City Health Department. And the relative crudity of syndromic surveillance back then, let alone attaching context to population level signals, really, I mean, the efficiencies you can build in now against the kind of work we used to do, being dispatched into the field just to interview emergency physicians because some weird blip was showing up on syndromic. Well, we have contextual data. It's not always perfect, but it's a lot faster than sending interns to, Lincoln Hospital 3 days after you see something odd on your surveillance. And that gets us out of a generative space where we might distrust signals, not fully out. I mean, there's a gray area there that we can't really get into too much, but it's very different than asking an LLM, what is going on in North Brooklyn on Tuesday afternoon that I'm seeing a spike in suicide admissions at Woodhull Hospital, that kind of thing.
Aaron, you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Simone said. I mean, these systems, it's not just generative, right? It's the ability to assign semantics to like really noisy, unstructured inputs, right? And to me, that's, for a long time, AI was like, how do we represent knowledge? And we're trying to like write first order logic. It was insane, right? And so we can represent knowledge now with language and with images and with videos and have computers that can understand them. Not yet to Martha's standards, but we're getting there. And so I think that's the power, is like the ability to use these semantic representations of unstructured pieces of information to inform decision making.
Okay, Thank you very much. Let's dive now to 5 to 10 years. Let's go a little far from here. What are you cautiously optimistic about, and what could go wrong if not careful? Jack.
It's a really long window. First I would say that we have to be practical with our expectations with AI, as you were mentioning that it's not there, and many times we expect a lot from these tools that they would replace many of the tasks that we as humans do, but we see that now they're not there. It's still they cannot do many of. They seem to they pretend to do most of this. Maybe it's 80% done or whatever that number. It's not 100%. Now the question is, in 5 to 10 years, can we see that reaching 100%? It's possible. We have seen like self-driving cars. They are there. They're working fine. And that helps us shift that our mind that it may be possible. Many of the things can be done without human AI involvement in research, and what those will be, it's hard for anybody to guess, and we have to see that.
Anyone who wants to add on? Yeah.
I'm wading into troubled waters with this response, and there's a reason I place it in the longer time horizon. I do think there's a pressing need to collapse and address administrative burden in government, in the provision of human services, in the provision of social services, and that is such a perfectly semi-structured semantic space that I do think there's very real potential for these tools to actually collapse some of the extreme stressors people attempting to access services confront. A non-trivial amount of time I spent as a mental health counselor was talking about the immigration system, was talking about trying to get a housing voucher in New York City. I had my undergrads read documents like SNAP applications and the application for withholding from DHS. God knows what that looks like now. Now, the reason I mention that being troubled waters is because we've seen extraordinarily cynical, bad faith attempts to do exactly that, that were simply putting a label on what was ultimately wrecking. And I think the reputation of genuine attempts to collapse administrative burden would have to recover a little bit, I hope, within 5 to 10 years. And then we can genuinely look at why some of these burdens exist. Just one important caveat to that. They don't exist, or at least don't exist fully, because they're run by hapless bureaucrats. That's a really toxic fantasy about how government works. They are, though, the operationalization of means testing and gatekeeping. And that, the value we attach to that is going to have to be simultaneously collapsed to make any kind of technical progress in addressing those as genuine population level stressors.
Thank you. Mhm. Go ahead.
I'll just add, I don't know what will happen in 5 or 10 years, but in terms of what we need to be careful with, and I think coming from a qualitative researcher perspective, and I don't know if Dr. Jenny Stoll is in the room, but I know that she's voiced this perspective, is will we face an increased pressure in oversimplifying or streamlining qualitative work? And so, especially with if nuances where large language models are not great at yet, and if if it progresses, if it gets better, that's great. If it doesn't, then will we see kind of a pressure to oversimplify qualitative research work if this tool is kind of taken up? And so that would be this is where I'm cautious looking forward.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Aaron.
Just quickly, so agentic AI is the buzzword these days, right? And what does that even mean, right? It really just means, our the cost of like creating an automated system is quickly approaching zero, right? Like before, if I wanted to make some like software system that would like, I don't know, randomly survey people online about their health status, and then if it sees a blip, send an email to the public health coordinator in a city. Like, I don't know, just made that up, right?
Yeah.
So you could just make that up, and like in 5 to 10 years, you could probably make something that does that in a day, right? And so I guess that's the double-edged sword, right? There's going to be so many of these things being created. some of them good, some of them terrible. And so how do we sort through that kind of menagerie of agents running wild just in the digital world, not even talking about the physical world.
Okay. I'll move to my next question. What are some of the biggest challenges for educators when it comes to students using AI, and what are some strategies you may recommend for addressing these challenges?
We're gonna have the ChatGPT cheating argument now, right? Okay. Um, look, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for this. I would say, in computer science, obviously people write software, and people have been using the internet to help them write software forever. Um, look, that's why we have in-person assessments. Um, you know, I think the vast majority of students want to learn, right? And so I don't come at it as a don't use this system, and especially now that pretty much all software engineers in industry are using AI support in their coding. So I know there's some downfalls. I'm not as worried about it because I think most people genuinely want to learn. But as educators, yeah, we need to make sure there's assessments that are free from computers. I don't know.
To it.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
My biggest concern is that we as educators won't be able to adapt and meet the moment. I feel like we laughed as we heard the question because we were saying, are we going to have this conversation of how do we keep students from cheating? And I think that that is an important component, but we also have to be thinking about how are we as educators going to meet the moment, and that means accepting that that AI is here and it's being used, and so how are we changing? My second biggest concern is really the loss of critical thinking skills. I think we've all, shared this concern. There's research out there showing this already. But how are we meeting this moment? And so,
Simon, you want to add?
I'm not an instructor. I will add our lab is engaged in a long-running series of focus groups with a local youth organization in Providence. And those have been fascinating conversations, but one of the things that we were not really expecting to hear was that a lot of these are all high school age students, that a lot of young people feel peer pressure to use generative AI to complete their assignments. That might sound commonsensical, but understanding and studying adolescent decision making, peer regulatory pressures, everyone's drinking, everyone's having sex right now, are enormous. And if that's driving some of this recourse to these tools, even among people who would frankly prefer not to use them, that's an area to intervene.
I'll open up to the audience a little bit. What are some of the concerns that you have about students using AI? Just one or two from the audience.
Is that, especially for our master's students, we only have them for a couple of years. And as everyone has said up front, AI can be a good start, but you have to have the experience and the expertise to review the results to see whether or not they're valid. And the muscle that you need to train to critique for validity takes time, right? So like there's no shortcuts to running a marathon. So you have to do the work. And I think we just need to also rise to the occasion of trying to figure out what critical thinking skills are necessary to teach students so that you can go back to the results and look at what the sources are and how are they getting to the results, and does this make sense from a critical lens? And I don't know that we've all gotten to that point yet, but I think trying to help students understand they need to scrutinize the validity of the results is going to be really important.
Thank you. What does good data stewardship look like in terms of text and online data? Mara, you want to answer that?
Sure. So in the research that I've done, what that looks like for us is only using publicly available data. I mean, that's the bare minimum, obviously. Any use of LLM for human subjects research might constitute a loss of confidentiality. So obviously, never using interview data unless you, with the large language model, unless you have explicitly requested the participant's permission, which is not standard right now in IRB consent forms. And so certainly that's the most basic of considerations. And in terms of online data anonymizing, I noticed that for those of you who shared who shared screenshots anonymizing the data is probably the bare minimum.
Aaron, you want to add on?
Yeah, I don't know. There's actually, so, you know, in the circles I run in, obviously they're using a lot of like online social media data. There have been people trying to experiment with like getting consent even for publicly available data. You know, the question is how you do it at scale, right? And so there are some mechanisms to try to let people opt in to these types of studies that use publicly available data. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think you have to be always a good steward of the data, keep it privacy protected and encrypted, while then also how do you ensure replicability of your research, right? So I don't know. People have been wrestling with that for a while, but I think we'll have to continue to do so. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I just thought of an example of that. Something that we faced in the research that I was talking about today is, for example, for posts or videos that were available when the data was sourced but are no longer there. Do you exclude those? Do you not? Like those kinds of decisions. I think it has taken a lot of discussion in terms of like, is it a snapshot in the moment and we leave those videos in, or we actually have to remove them because they're no longer there. So, just an example.
Any other person from the audience who want to comment? Otherwise, we can go to the audience. Yes, yes, I see a hand there. Good.
Hi, this is such an interesting discussion. I was thinking as you were talking about this long-standing literature based on the ethics of informed consent and how you're raising informed consent here, especially with the qualitative component. Do you have any experiences on what? So it's like we struggle enough with communicating what our research is all about, much less the use of AI and people understanding what that means, our participants. So I was wondering if you have any good positive experiences or lessons learned and how we might think about that at a higher level.
Well, I'll throw that to my panelists.
I know you all touched on it, but I'm like interested to hear a little bit more.
So for the research that I do, it's considered, so I always submit request for IRB exemption, which it means explaining what I'm doing, how am I sourcing the data, the nature of the research that I'm doing. And up until now, and I'm looking at Paul because I know that you're part of the IRB committees, but up until now, my research has always been considered IRB exempt. And so we really don't have to think any further in terms of informed consent. So I'm really curious to hear actually, Erin, about how, I'm not even sure how you would gain consent for that kind of thing. So, and there's ethical guidelines that are out there for social listening, for example, for, you know, how do you ensure that you're considering ethics in your research, but yeah, not that part of informed consent.
I would just add to further complicate this picture. You know, consent requires capacitation, and if somebody sits down next to me and wants to enroll in a clinical trial and it becomes evident that they're experiencing florid psychosis, I'm not getting capacitated informed consent out of that person, let alone if they show up drunk, if they show up and evidence signs of, say, an intellectual disability. We don't have that level of assessment, let alone verification of comprehension on web data, frankly, no matter what we do. And that's even setting aside the notion of adulthood versus legal minor status, which again, in the very nitty gritty world of like high threshold informed consent, like for instance, adolescent biobehavioral trials, you know, consent is a process, consent is constantly renewed, and consent in a sense is also a philosophy. It's a lot different than getting a checkbox on a form. Now, I don't think that precludes research on public web data. I would rather a certain honesty enter the conversation about what is and isn't possible versus diluting the notion of consent that we've had for 70 or 80 years now.
So now we are talking about ethics. Now, in terms of practice, what's a safeguard you've actually built and what difference did it make? Aaron, I know you use a lot of online data. So I'll start with you.
I mean, you know, but we don't do a lot of interventions, right? So, I mean, in terms of safeguard of like the privacy of the data we're using, right? Like that kind of thing. We do all kind of the standard things. I don't, if you're talking about like, oh, now we're sitting a human down with generative AI and they're interacting with that, right? I haven't done those interventions. We've done other user studies using AI systems for other purposes. But as far as like having a generative AI system that a human's using, I think probably Simone's the one who's most dialed into that issue right now.
Simone, you want to take over?
I can speak to the procedures that I'm aware of. I share a development partner with. Rachel Cornfield and Jonah Meyerhoff at CBITS at Northwestern, who are a couple of years ahead of me on the SMS dialogue tree architectural work. A couple things. One is just straight up, not even a human in a loop. If there's a generation, it goes straight to an investigator, an RA. They assess it, they release it. That's how you pilot this stuff. Direct participant GAI loops, I'm sorry, I just think they're too dangerous. Given a degree of confidence and very sophisticated guard railing that can emerge out of processes like that, out of safety red teaming, which is a whole other set of procedures, I think you could eventually graduate to a semi-automated loop where you might have, say, a stack of classifiers and regex matches just to make sure that any terms whatsoever potentially associated with a high acuity situation are not being allowed to fester absent investigator intervention. Now, this all is realistic only on the like explanatory side of the trial spectrum. The whole point of the pragmatic side would be, what does this look like in the field? I brought up the question of trust and let alone liability as a counselor. What does it look like to actually implement these interventions in a CBO, in a hospital ED, in private practice? We don't even, frankly, we have almost no data coming out of what people are doing in private practice mental health care, and it's by some estimates half of how we even deliver that care in this country. But it's a set of questions that are very different on the architectural versus the implementation side. That being said, again, there's progress, there's procedures, and there's very careful baby steps that we can make that I worry might nevertheless be undone by things such as character.ai and some of the really gross stuff that's out there.
Okay, thank you. So we know that online data can be skewed, can be noisy. Whose voice gets mazed, and how do we correct for that?
I guess I'll start that one. So I guess the question is, what's the alternative? Is it random digit dialing with 3% response rate, right? So, in our own work, we do think about that quite a bit. And we've done the standard like reweighting things where you have to reweight based on the population of your sample, the characteristics of your sample. And that can have a big effect. I think I showed an example where New Hampshire was like an outlier. And I think that in part has to do with an age bias there in terms of who was actually online, right? And what sample we have there. So yeah, I think now that reweighting requires you to know something about the demographics of the individuals in your sample, which we have to guess at, which is creepy, right? But unfortunately, fairly accurate, right? If I want to guess your income, college status, et cetera, like you can do pretty well at that with online data. So it's a kind of a mixed bag.
Jack, you want to add on?
I think very well described that having these methods to correct for these, adding corrections in the skewness, and for that we need more information. And the question is also, in the end, it's going to be, what is the alternative? Like you have sample size could be very small for the positives versus negatives are hugely like it can be like skewed, unbalanced data sets. All those things play into the can influence the outcomes. So first, being aware of these potential limitations of the data sets is important, and then second, then making that determination what alternatives can be used if you cannot use the same data set.
Okay.
I'm curious, actually, if I may. The generation that sort of grew up with text-based social media is aging. There's a joke that everyone on Blue Sky is 38. I'm wondering just very briefly what kind of techniques exist to get, say, TikTok data into a form for analysis, if indeed they do. Yeah, I'm throwing it at you.
You can, yes, there is not a nice, easy way to get TikTok data, but people scrape it for sure, right? And, you know, of course, there's comments attached to that, and then there's the videos themselves. And of course, we're seeing our ability to extract semantics from videos is growing as well. I'm not as familiar with like using that data in like public health context, right? It's a little bit more small end kind of things where they're analyzing like more qualitatively the responses going on. But yes, I mean, there's a whole other conversation we can have about like how does one even access this data, especially in the age where data is money, and systems are being closed off. Should it be that way? Should it not be that way, et cetera? But yes, people are doing that.
Okay. Any other comment from the audience? Yes.
So OpenAI owns it, and they can do, well, they can do almost anything they want with it. The main thing they would want to do with it is use it for training, right? And so it becomes an example, like they see how your interaction ended. Was it good or bad in some sense? And then they use that as part of the model. So how would it hurt the participants, right? So if they're revealing something personal about themselves, they've now lost control of that data, right? What could go wrong? Well, at some point, I was talking about this last night, right? At some point, there's going to be a massive data breach, and every conversation ever from one of these big companies is going to be released. I'm sure it will happen. So that's one obvious threat. I don't know. What are you guys worried about with that?
These are all excellent points. And I think part of our question was, can we access that? Can somebody else access that data without leak? Is also my question, I wonder. I don't know if you have any insights on.
Yeah, the other, and this is more speculative, right? Like, so if it does train on it, there's a whole cadre of techniques where you try to get the system to basically regurgitate its training data. The New York Times lawsuit is kind of related to that as well, to have it regurgitate an article. So there is that kind of attack where you try to get it to say exactly what its training data said, so that you can actually access these things that it was trained on. But at scale, it's a different issue.
Yeah.
I'll also add there are techniques to basically hack around this. You know, if you take your company's intranet and dump it into a RAG, it would be trivial to say, get it to return potentially sensitive information, let alone if you have plain text credentials sitting in there, well, you've just lost the keys to the house. There are people who do this kind of thing, and people who build defenses.
Thank you. I'll move to my next question. In terms of partnership, can you share some collaborations with industry or some community that worked? What made it a win-win situation, and what was a red flag?
So I can talk about working with, for example, MC Saatchi when we first got started doing social listening. And I mean, the win for them is they get a contract from USAID, and they're not necessarily cheap. I don't know what they charge right now, but when we got started, it was a little bit of a struggle, a back and forth, and having them understand that we are not a brand, that we are not interested in well, I guess you could call health a brand, and you can call health behavior a brand, or we're branding health behavior, but it took a moment for them to understand the logic behind our work. And we're not here to grow a brand unless you're thinking that, reproductive autonomy is our brand and we're growing that. And so once we established that partnership, it worked really well for us. The price tag was also high, but it was a great learning opportunity, I think, for them and also for us at getting started.
Aaron? Yeah.
Yeah, so this Center for Community Engaged AI, you've heard mentioned a few times, right? So, I mean, we care a lot about this idea, and we've tried to think about different ways to structure these relationships. And kind of where we're at now is, we do a number of different things. We have workshops. In fact, we had one in this room where we first kind of just talk to people who are curious about AI in the community. Like, what can it do? What it cannot do? What are the worries, right? Kind of that first contact of like building some trust and communications with folks. And then, a big part of what we do is try to figure out, well, how can we work together to build AI systems that are helpful for a particular organization, right? And so, so a nice thing about tooling that helps us with that is the very active kind of service learning curriculum and support structures that we have. So that's kind of our second phase, is where we engage with someone, faculty mentor and a group of students, trying to show kind of immediate value of these tools to help them with their work, right? And so one example of this is with this group, Court Watch NOLA, who works in criminal justice, obviously. And so our phase one partnership was really just like helping with data infrastructure for what they were trying to do. And then once that kind of value has been shown, then we can go out and try to find other external funding to build more sophisticated AI tools, in this case, to help with oversight and transparency in the court system. So I don't know. So to me, it's just coming at it from like the engineering kind of perspective, like how do we build things in partnership with like local nonprofits or city governments? And I think it's just that, like any other thing, it's kind of building trust over time and growing those partnerships. Yeah.
Okay. Well, any other addition? Okay. So in terms of all of these that we've talked about, what roles can students play? Like in terms of your research, collaborations, what specific role can students play in these areas?
Students? The
Yeah,
question is
yeah.
for
Role of students, yeah. Mhm.
rural students.
No, the role that students can
role
play.
that
Yeah,
students can play.
yeah.
So the different applications we can look at, even before that, the technology, like AI has been here for long, like decades. We have been using this for like machine learning in many fields, in public health, and especially in medicine has been widely used. And students, it's a great learning opportunity. And then that's how I got involved. And like back in early 2000s, when I was in the PhD program, I started exploring. I had no background in AI. As an engineering student, I just started exploring, taking classes of what AI is, and then collaborating with the physician to learn the application of AI at that time on breast cancer diagnosis. So that's how I started learning AI. I had no formal training in computer science, but taking few classes and learning that helped me give some foundation for AI. So we're talking about traditional AI that requires taking rigorous coursework, understanding neural networks, the other things, and deep neural networks, all those things. So you have to have some rigorous training. But now things have changed substantially with Gen AI. It does not require somebody to have that computer science background necessarily to apply that technology. Like, so that's where it's very powerful, very interesting time for students to explore applications. I was reading the abstracts, many interesting applications of AI and many Gen AI in particular, which do not require students to know a lot about computer science, but they can really move the public health field forward. So this is exciting I think, for students.
Thank you. Any other addition from the panel?
I'm working. They're not the youth populations I'm used to working with, but I'm working with some Brown undergraduates to do some tuning on the tool I presented on. And my role with working with young people, particularly coming from the community, is that if it's essentially drudgery, then make sure and build some degree of technical capacity building into it so that they walk away from the drudgery with, a little bit of extra skill, a little bit of extra self-confidence. And being transparent about what certain parameters do, about what variations on a prompt will elicit from these models, while essentially telling someone, just don't look at the rest of this gnarly code base right now, can be are you going to build an expert that way? No, but we don't need 1 million experts. We do need 1 million people who do understand what's actually happening under the hood of these models. There's already some social science work that says interactions with, for instance, ChatGPT are very different between people who at least claim to possess a knowledge of understanding of how it works versus those who don't. And I do think we can start to make more scalable inroads just by, forgive me for being on brand, but demystifying, those under the hood aspects of it. And I think there's very sophisticated and case by case possibilities to do so.
Thank you. Since this is about students, I'll allow the general public to comment on it. What are some of the roles you believe that you can play in this conversation?
I do have a worry, which we thought about when doing that project as a student. There are the tools, and the tools in theory don't require knowledge of computer sciences, but I don't know if that's related to the questions that you were asking. And it's, do I have the basic knowledge to know that this tool that apparently is so easy to use, if I'm using it correctly, and if in fact this is proper methodological use of the tool, like the science that the results that I'm outputting. I don't know if this is proper English, I'm sorry, but the results that I'm that I'm showing, are these results valid? Because since I don't know computer sciences and I don't know the explanations behind the process, how am I critical about what I'm doing and about my work? I don't know if that's what you wanted.
And that's an excellent point. It's, you're giving somebody a powerful technology, and it has to be used wisely. But the bar has come low, come substantially lower than what it used to be with traditional machine learning and AI methods. So that still gives the opportunity. Doesn't mean that a student does not have to understand that, but it's within their reach, and especially in a public health school. In computer science, that's a different ballgame. They already are been working in this field. It's a different level. So that's the point. Still, that the vetting has to be done and has to be rightly used. That's needed.
Okay. When is a project enough to call it an AI project? Does it matter the label or the outcome matters more?
Writing paper, SSD, as it's called AI, I don't know. Perhaps not.
If it's going to an AI special issue, then, then the threshold is lower. I don't have a good answer for you.
Yeah, I don't think there is a good answer, just because I think we've so chewed the terminology into mush, it's very hard to apply it in a concrete and reliable way. I'm actually involved in an umbrella review, a systematic review of systematic reviews in AI and mental health. And that was by far the most difficult methodological aspect that we confronted. And basically what we did is we sort of punted it. There was a big new Google AI field manual for mental health, and we basically said we relied on Google's definition. So but it gets very silly. Is latent class analysis AI? We wouldn't typically call it that, but it's using the same optimization algorithm under the hood. There's some techniques that we would, and is that a meaningful difference? Mathematically, I'm sure people would be like, of course it is. But, at the level of a systematic review, it starts to become fairly arbitrary. Hate to say it.
Okay. So what have you changed based on the feedback that you received from maybe deploying some app or some AI algorithm, or the feedback you've gotten from your users? What have you changed over the years, and why did you have to make those changes?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. I mean, generally speaking, I think providing explainability, interpretability of the results is something we've worked a lot on, whether it's user facing or not. I think this came up earlier, right? Like, how do you get trust from users of a system? I think that's going to be a critical piece of it. And so I think the more we can explain why the system's making this decision, or why did it produce this output, that's going to help usability. So that's one thing that certainly has become a greater focus.
What innovations in the last 5 to 10 years have truly changed how you work, and why?
These are tough questions.
This is, I would say, generative AI is, it's really, it's the big change that has happened in the last 3 years. And that's perhaps one of the reasons that a lot of excitement and talk about that. It's brought the whole world to a different level in every single field. So that's what I see this as one of the most innovations happen in the last few years.
Just to Aaron's point, the ease of access of building and deploying your own tools, something 5 years ago easily felt out of reach, and is relatively trivial as long as you don't want it to look pretty or generalize to any other use case. And that's fascinating in the doors it opens just for individual productivity, but also our relationships to technology and to our own devices.
If you could add a new data source tomorrow, what would it be and why? Or a new data type, what will it be and why? To the audience, what data type or data source do you think if you were given the chance to add, you would add and why?
Anthropic is really good at sharing some data, some stuff, but most people don't plot. So for almost all of it, I'm like, this would be really useful if it was for ChatGPT.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, yeah. Go
Hi,
ahead.
my name's Tyra Mitchell-Williams. I'm with the Health Policy and Administration Department here at Tulane. And if there was a data source, and this has been rumbling around in my head throughout all of the talks, is the implications on policy, which is on brand for me, right? But really the implications on, you've brought up like liability for clinicians and the bioethics and informed consent. I wonder like what data could we pull from the use of AI in regulation, whether it's authorized or unauthorized, and the same with clinical practice. And I have a clinical background as well, and just clinicians are using it, whether it's authorized or not. And that data source I think would be very interesting to put into, to answer that question, but also the implications on policy and regulation.
Okay, thank you.
Something to that point that we're moving towards in our lab is actually soliciting with consent chat logs from younger users around issues of social isolation and mental health challenges. And again, we're trying to do this within a paradigm of very well thought out consent, up to and including granting the autonomy to let them redact certain portions of chat logs that they wouldn't want to share with investigators. There's a lot you lose there, but you don't lose the bioethics. And that's a big point. But to get to yours, that will eventually allow us to understand what does harm look like in a human technology interaction that we are not typically privy to. And I think that's what you're getting at, because yeah, at scale, that should absolutely be informing policy. And with internal tools at large organizations, it almost certainly already is, which have entirely different barriers around consent, of course.
Okay. I'll move to my last question to the panelists. What are your key takeaways from the discussion today? And I'll allow every panelist to give me about 10 words or less, something very simple.
By working together across all of these fields, we can build AI responsibly.
Thank you.
So it's important to add different perspectives in any AI work we do, especially in public health.
Okay, thank you. Martha.
So my less than 10 words was going to be, don't quite trust yet, and verify. But I'm going to work with Aaron, and I'm going to try to get there in terms of, trusting it. Well, we'll see what happens.
Okay.
I think a lot of people notably people who are not in this room right now, a lot of people initially approach these technologies from a place of exploitation, and that inevitably sows very large scale distrust. And it's something we should understand as we start to try and bring them back into the loop and show them just how empowering these tools can be.
We'll end it. Thank you very much.
All right. I want to thank our panelists and everyone, and thank you all for coming to the morning session and for your excellent questions. We are now moving to lunch, which we have until 1 o'clock. And keep in mind, we also have the poster session now. So please meander through the hallway over here. I think we have 17 posters reflecting a lot of really excellent work from our students. So please grab your lunch and make sure you get a chance to interact with our students. So We'll be back at 1 o'clock and see you then. Thank you.